by others like at Princeton and stuff, and they're boring. Other people are boring. I'm absolutely fascinating because I use the web constantly. If you say something, we look up Jack Attack. However, so this was really important because the British that went to it and impressed the whole nation really were so proud of themselves as a nation that was probably one of the reasons why communism never really got started in Britain. I remember Karl Marx was there writing the Communist Manifesto, etc. Right? And that's, I think, one of the reasons why the British didn't mind him being there, because Germany was worried because there was a movement, and here's a individual writing pamphlets and trying to get everybody aroused and stuff. So they chased him out. France had the same problem, so they chased him out. England could care less. You could sit there and write all day if you like, no problem, and that's what he did, right? In fact, his grave is in London, right? Where is John Stuart Mill's grave, though? Not in England, even though some think of him as England's greatest philosopher. Who knows? You have quite a few competitors, right? Hume, by the way, is absolutely Scotland's greatest. Everyone says that David Hume is the greatest, right? But you have a toss-up between like John Locke. A lot of people think John Locke was one of the British greatest philosophers. Bertrand Russell certainly would be in the running. I think probably there are just so many British philosophers. When you ask who's the greatest British philosopher, it'd be like asking you who's your favorite singer. You've got so many. Who the heck could you pick at the moment, right? But John Stuart Mill's grave is in France, not in England. And that's because the last years of his life he lived on the French Riviera. And so his grave is in Avignon. If you're ever, you'd have to look all around the cemetery. I've not seen pictures of his actual grave, although I guess you could find it. Probably. By the way, I'm curious about philosophers' graves because, of course, I'm getting close to death myself. So I know I'll be at Fort Ridge. We've already strolled along hand in hand, Donna and I. Donna wanted to go and look at the graveyard, so the next time she's there to look at my grave, she'll remember us being there walking around.
Oh my God, that's so
morbid?
grim.
Is that morbid? I don't know.
It's like a date?
Yeah. No, well, hopefully we've got like 20 plus years to go, so I don't know. But so why is John Stuart Mill so important? Let me go to my old notes, by the way. I have notes. Although I've noticed I can never quite figure out which one. Aha! I went to the right one. So John Stuart Mill. Is a follower of Jeremy Bentham. And Jeremy Bentham, did I show you a picture of Jeremy Bentham yet? Because you can still see Jeremy, you can still pose for a selfie with Jeremy Bentham. One of my ex-students went to London and visited where Jeremy Bentham is and sent me on Facebook a selfie of him standing there with Jeremy Bentham. So let me go. Pretty cool. There he is.
Oh.
This is in the entrance to one of the university buildings where he was a member of the Board of Trustees. And in his will, he insisted that he continue to attend all the board meetings. And so they saved his body, although that's not his actual face, that's a wax face. But they did they keep his face in that booth down at the bottom. Let's see. Oops, I didn't want that. I want this. There it is. So they actually have his face kind of mummified, sitting in the bottom of the booth at his feet. And at the board meetings, they wheel the whole booth in and sign him in as president. Isn't that hilarious? British. But if you want to go see it, it's just in the lobby of the building. As you walk in, there's like no guards or anything, and it's on your way to the gift shop and the coffee shop. So it's kind of, I've been there with my Oculus Rift. You know, you could go in and you know, there's her, you know, and there's the bookshop. You know, you see people just strolling around, no line. You know, when they had Lenin in the mausoleum in Moscow, they had, you know, all these people in Red Square all lined up all the time to go walk by Lenin's tomb. Nobody walks by this and thinks a whole lot of it, I suppose. But Jeremy Bentham gives us utilitarianism, which I would say it's a, at the time, new name for an old way of thinking. But it does have some principles. It's based on hedons. A hedon is a single element of pleasure. I don't know really how you would measure it. But say you have a decision to make, and you're trying to figure out which thing should I do. For Jeremy Bentham, what you do is you count up all the hedons for each act and use your hedonistic calculus to figure out which one gives the most elements of pleasure, and then that's the one you do. So it's the hedonistic calculus, which is kind of cool. So I figured, you know, so beautiful summer day, the fair is on, my wife and the kids, you know, they all want to go to the fair, so I figure out, well, you know, if we go to the fair, oh, this one's dead too. I'm good today. What the heck? So assume I'm writing calculations up here. How much pleasure will all the kids have if we go to the fair? How much pleasure will my wife have? How little pleasure I will have, you know, having to drive out there, park, pay money, you know, pay for the tickets, you know, walk them around to the things that they want to go do, you know, all that stuff. You know. So minus hedons for me, right? But you know, you add them all up and you figure out, okay, so if we go to the park or the fair, rather, this 50 hedons of pleasure will be had by the whole family. If, on the other hand, I stay home and read Hegel on the back deck in the sunshine, I'll have 100 hedons of pleasure. So it's pretty clear that we should just stay home. Well, no. That's, of course, it depends on who's calculating how much pleasure everything will, right? You know, how does this work? You know, how on earth did he figure this out? Plus, there's problems, and this is where the most famous quote from John Stuart Mill comes from, and it's also our quiz question for today. It's a fill in the blank. So I'll start the quote off. That goes, better to be a dissatisfied human than a happy pig. Second statement, better to be a dissatisfied Socrates than a happy blank, fill in the blank, or a satisfied blank.
Are we supposed to fill in the blank with what he said or with what we think should be there?
You could do both, but find out what he said first. It's easy, it's in your text, it's also on the web. That's easy, you'll find it. But the interesting thing about this is, well, first, how many of you really agree that it's better to be a dissatisfied human than a happy pig? How many of you would rather be a happy pig? You agree. You
No,
agree.
I'd rather be a
Better-
human.
Dissatisfied human.
Yeah.
Any of you rather be a happy pig? Not, you would? Yes?
I think all the happy pigs would like to be happy pigs.
Well, you know, the thing about happy pigs, and this also reminds me of the fair, is when you're looking at, they are happy. You can tell. They're very content. All the little piglets sitting there, you know how they do, right? And they're completely oblivious to the fact that right above their head is a sign that says $5.95 a pound. Right? I know what that means. That pig is not long for this earth, right? You know, it'll be in its grave before I'm in mine. You know, but you know, actually, you don't put pigs in graves; you eat them. It's called bacon, right? You know how that is, right? How many of you have ever eaten bacon? How many of you are hostile to the whole idea of eating a fellow pig?
Yeah, I don't
Are you calling us pigs?
No, but you know, if you'd rather be a happy pig, you know, I don't know. I don't know how to deal with that. I'm so used to the idea of this hierarchy, that it's better to be a human being than a pig. Even if it's a happy pig, even if you're not a happy person yourself. Which actually is the assumption that Mill is making. That just the fact that you're a human being living in this world and comparing yourself to a pig that's taken care of, etc., you're going to be dissatisfied, at least to some. I mean, you know, some of you, as you came in, sat down, thought this was an absolutely terrible day so far.
Don't ask.
But you get the idea. I mean, you know, people, and in fact, his implication is the more intelligent you are, the more dissatisfied you are likely to be.
You're not a fool.
Did you look it up?
Yes, I did.
She cheated. She looked. No, well, that's not cheating. That's doing what you're supposed to do. So yeah, that suggests that more intelligence means you're going to be more dissatisfied. Is that true? The more you learn about life and history, and what makes you intelligent?
The ability to adapt to change.
Knowing how to adapt to change.
The ability to.
Yeah. So, is it right to say that the more intelligence you have, the more likely you're going to be less happy?
Not necessarily, because you, by definition of that one, you could adapt to that unhappiness and then be satisfied with that.
And how much freedom you have too. So I could get Slavoj Žižek into this picture too, because if we go back and look at the video that I put on.
Is perceived as impossible today. Mario Monti, you know who he is, recently said, I quote, "Those who govern must not allow themselves to be completely bound by parliamentarians," end of quote. Which then is, for Monti, the higher force whose authority can suspend the decisions of a democratically elected body, representative of the people. Already back in 1998, the answer was given by Hans Dittmeier, at that time the governor of Deutsche Bundesbank, who praised national governments for preferring, it's quote, a wonderful expression, the permanent plebiscite of global markets to the plebiscite of the ballot box. I think it's a wonderful ideological manipulation.
Speaking of which, how many of you have been following the march of the Hondurans coming north? Are you following what's going on there? So they started off with like 2,000 in a convoy confronting the Mexicans at the Mexican border, trying to get over the border. Yes? And once they got over it, somehow they ended up 5,000. I don't know how that happened, but they're all marching towards the United States, which is where they want to go. Does that make sense? This is migration. It's, massive Hondurans. You haven't followed any of it? See it. Go.
Oh my God, 4,000 people?
Hoping for a video, but that's good enough. So you know, President Trump was elected. On one of his campaign promises was that he would fix immigration and wanted to build the wall, etc., and basically put a stop to immigration unless there was very specific criteria met by the immigrants, right? And of course, you know that we've had a constant flow of immigrants into the United States from the South, mostly, right? And it's continuing, of course, and it looks like it's going to hit a kind of a cataclysmic point once they all get to the actual border of the United States. This should be interesting, right? When you look at various arguments about the nature of immigration and who can come in to the United States, a lot of folks will argue that we should open our borders to everyone who wants to come here. Everybody. In fact, migration should be a human right. Remember we talked about human rights and how we argue about which ones should be human rights and so on. Some feel that migrating wherever you feel like you want to go ought to be a human right, right? Regardless of national borders, etc. Clearly there's a lot of Hondurans in this group that feel exactly that, right? On the other hand, there's others that feel like no migration should be allowed, especially into our country, unless you're already here. Well, that wouldn't be migration. That's right. You've met people that feel that way, and they feel that way for good reason, right? It's called physics. There's only so many people. Why do all the people want to come to the country that has the best opportunities? Because that's the country that has the best opportunities, right? Would any of you like to move to Saudi Arabia?
No.
Nobody? Right? How about the Turkish Saudi embassy? No, nobody wants to go there either. Should we be concerned how Saudi Arabia treats its own citizens? That's a whole other question. I mean, just because they chop the fingers and arms and legs and toes and off of Khashoggi, because he reported on things in Saudi Arabia. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine doing that? Is irony allowed, by the way? No. You are not. You can go to jail for 5 years in Saudi Arabia if you publish an article that has irony in it. It is officially banned, and it's 5-year penalty in jail. I'm not kidding. That's actually a new rule. that's not what that's irony too, but that's not the article. Oh well. It's true though, I just read it. Not fake news. It's an actual real new rule that you're not allowed to publish irony in Saudi Arabia's journals, etc. So that's kind of interesting.
It says it on the second article.
Yeah.
So there, I'm not making it up. I actually, well, I hope. I have been fooled. I've read The Onion and thought, oh, this is real news. That happened. However, so what I'm looking at is a hierarchy that's natural, a natural hierarchy, and it's better to be at the top of the hierarchy than at the bottom. John Stuart Mill had this problem, and that's part of the problem with utilitarianism. Because in utilitarianism, the main principle is the greatest good for the greatest number. So, for example, in this town, I love going to the symphony. I used to go to the opera. I used to go to it all the time. I haven't lately. The opera this week that's coming is the HMS Pinafore, which I already saw once, so I'm not really excited about going to see it again. But when they have an opera, it costs like 80 bucks or so. Depends on the price of the ticket per person. Plus, that doesn't really pay for the whole cost of bringing the opera here and putting it on for only like 3 performances or so. It usually has to be funded by like ConocoPhillips or someone else with lots of money. And by the way, when you go, you'll find quite a lot of the seats empty. But how many of you have been to the fights in downtown? Anybody been to the, like the boxing matches or whatever? Right? I think it's like 10 bucks a ticket. It's, from what I understand, it's usually crowded, everybody goes, and you can drink beer while you're there, right? So that might be part of it. I don't know. But I know that one of my sons actually participated and got beat up in the ring. I was furious with him, but hey, he wanted the money, so he did that to himself. But it's always crowded, and it's cheap. And we don't have to bring up any scenery or any special stars or anything. We've got all the fools who we want to beat one another up for money. Right? There you go. So it's pretty cheap. So notice that means that we're spending a lot of money for a few individuals who enjoy the opera. Hardly any money for other people that love bread and circuses, basically, what the Romans used to call it, right? As long as you have plenty of bread and circuses, the people will be fine, right? And in a sense, that's kind of what happens here. So we have kind of a leadership class, an elite class, that spends the money on the things that they enjoy, but everybody else gets wrestling matches or whatever. That's okay? That's typical? Mill thought so too. So in his version of utilitarianism, it depends on your social class, but the government should spend more money keeping the elite happy than the poor people happy. You have to spend more money to keep those Socrateses who are dissatisfied as happy as possible, compared to the fools, because we've got plenty of fools, right? It's a ship of fools. Does that sound fair? And as Zizek says, the elite in Europe, right, prefer having the elite rule things than the ballot box, right? But you have the ballot box, you let people go vote, but guess what? You could just totally ignore what they do, what they say, right? They had an election in England several years ago to determine whether or not the Great Britain, England should exit from the European Union, and believe it or not, they actually voted predominantly to exit the European Union, right? So that's called Brexit, right? But ever since then, they've been arguing over how that actually would work, and it's way more complicated than anyone actually tried to figure out. The elite are against it. They want to stay a member of the Union, but the problem, of course, is that by staying a member of the European Union, all of the various nations, 28 of them now, right, lose their sovereignty to the EU, right? And the EU Parliament isn't elected by the people in Europe. It's appointed by the ministers from all of the countries who are already elected. So there's it's kind of like our Senate, right? You can vote for a senator, and then the senator goes in and they do what they think is best, right? So, for example, Murkowski just voted no for Kavanaugh, right? In her position in the panel that approved him to go up for the whole Senate vote, etc., right? And by the way, an awful lot of people in Alaska felt that was against their wishes, and they're now saying that they're going to vote against Murkowski. She's not going to get elected again. Have you heard that? Yes? So there's, of course, a border between what actually runs the country and the people voting for things. And Zizek is pointing out that the elite feel like that's much better. Let the elite run things, because after all, they're wiser. They know what should happen. When you let the people vote, it makes them feel good to vote, right? That's good to keep them happy. It's kind of like bread and circuses, right? It makes them feel like they've had their opportunity. But, I mean, by the way, a lot of you very wise folks feel like there's no point in voting, right? Any of you feel like it makes a difference? Nobody likes this topic at all, I can tell. Nobody's engaged in this discussion. Am I doing a terrible job of this? I think we should go back to some sort of aristocracy and let the elite run things? Or is that already the case? Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't. Doesn't matter. Good question. Doesn't matter. It's like the problem in the social sciences. You can't really experiment to see if it makes a difference. Because you can't rerun things and try it a different way to see what will happen. Should we go back and rerun World War II and this time decide not to go in on the war with the Allies, instead just let them lose to Germany and see what happens? You can't do it. You can't go back and do it. Right? So that's kind of annoying. Social sciences, that's why they're called soft sciences, among other things. Chemistry, you can just do the experiment as many times as you like. Social sciences, you can't say, okay, let's change things in the United States and not allow the pill and see if that helps marriages in the long run. No, we can't go backwards. It's too late. We already did it. That's kind of fun. Not, maybe not. No one's having fun. Oh well. So, let me go back to my notes. So, Jeremy Bentham, older generation, visited James Mill. James Mill, John Stuart Mill's father, was a good friend of Jeremy Bentham. Lots of folks used to come to the house. It was a hotbed of politics, etc. So John Stuart Mill grows up in a house that's full of all this kind of activity, becomes interested himself eventually in participating. He is eventually a member of Parliament for one tour. Not very happy with what it's like, so he decides not to run again. All his life, as a young man, he also works for the British East India Company, which his father also did. He never actually left London to work for them, so he never traveled to India or anything of that sort. He worked in an office that's still there, so you could actually see the windows where John Stuart Mill had tea every day. You know, he had a very set routine all the way, through tea and sandwiches or whatever, all the way through his whole life. Very routine individual. Until he married Harriet Taylor, and the two of them, by the way, wrote some works together. He did have a crisis in his 20s. He was homeschooled, by the way, and his father was a very intense teacher and made sure he learned his lessons extremely well, lots of memorization and so on. The reason he was homeschooled was because he was an atheist. His father was an atheist. And you couldn't go to the universities in England if you were an atheist, because in order to be admitted, you had to swear allegiance to the Church of England and to the king. And that required, of course, that you believe in God. And if you were an atheist, well, then you couldn't go. So his father taught him at home. By the way, he also didn't think of himself as a genius or anything especially smart, but he did work really hard at learning as much as he could. So that was his attitude about himself. Very important, his system of logic. Huge tome, but nonetheless, it was very important. And part of that is because even though the British are on the entering into the Industrial Revolution and all sorts of new devices are being invented, the sciences are actually becoming something supported by the state at this time, instead of just men that are interested in science having their own little interesting room in their house where they did experiments and so on. Now it's becoming an actually supported government affair. They weren't very good at doing science at all until John Stuart Mill developed his methods, which today are absolutely basic. We all are familiar with them, but it's amazing to realize that up until this point, people didn't use these very basic scientific methods. For example, when you're doing an experiment, it makes sense to look for agreement between the cause and the effect. So if I have causes A, B, C, D, and I have effect F that I'm looking for, and then I have causes A, B, D, and I have F, and then I have causes A, B, and I don't have F, then I have to start looking for the agreement between the list of causes and the event F, and I discover that A, B don't seem to make a difference whether they're there or not. It's the D that's really important to my having F. So there's an agreement between D and F. So you can narrow it down and say D is the cause of F, right? Difference would be take away And you end up with, well, once you take away something and you no longer have the cause, that's probably the cause of F, right? And then the more powerful system is the joint agreement and difference method. And that's, of course, where you put those two together and end up with figuring out what element might be the cause of F, etc. For example, having a drill rig in the Gulf of Mexico being destroyed by a Hurricane Ivan, and then ever since then you have a leak of oil coming from that spot, etc. Right? That could be the cause of an oil spill coming out of the Gulf, maybe, probably. That's pretty silly, but you get the idea. Either way, that's true. We have another one. In fact, it's been there for many years. It was there before the other one, but they didn't report it. That's pretty sly. They kept it a secret. Except, guess what? It's still leaking, so of course that's still a problem. The one that I like especially is concomitant variations. Did you ever use that expression before? Concomitant variations. That's where you go like this. So the weather is warmer, so we don't have snow. It's pretty obvious. It's an easy one, right? We don't have lakes that you can walk across yet because they have to freeze, right? That's kind of important for us, right? So concomitant variations. I got in trouble yesterday at the fellowship because the presentation was on AI. If we use artificial intelligence and we create these robots that then have conversations with us, and you can have, they can make them now of soft skin so that they can touch your hand and make you feel better and everything. Is that going to? That's eerie, but you can use those. I don't know. Is this going to be safe? I don't want one of those. Which one is this?
エリカチャンネルをご覧の皆様、こんにちは。ご存知とは思いますが、私、実はアンドロイドなんです。でも、アンドロイドって聞くと、みんなスマホを想像しちゃうっぽいですが、私は人そっくりなロボットのアンドロイドですからね。そう、私はロボットなんです。ちょっと美人すぎて驚きですよね。なんてね。まあ、冗談は置いといて、そんなアンドロイドの私ですが、人間とロボットが仲良くなれる未来のための研究に取り組んでいます。私の目指す未来は、
So Japan is using these robots more and more, especially in senior centers where they can't afford all the nurses in order to take care of the old people. So they're going to robots that come in and have conversations with the old people and hold their hand and etc. I remember a few years ago, one of the inventors of a robot that was like a baby seal. Yes? He was here, and we all got to pet the seal, and the seal would purr and react to you, etc. And they already use them, so they'll, the old person sitting there who's kind of, not really very functional anymore, but still a person, still needs care. They put one of these seals in their lap, and they sit there smiling and happy. It's like they have a pet dog, in their lap. Same kind of results. Even though, of course, it's not going to be nearly as much effort to take care of it, etc. You get the idea. So the question that came up yesterday was, okay, if we're moving to these AI, artificial intelligence, robots, and so on, and not only that, but also the chat bots that you can you can create your own app so that you can talk with a friend, and the friend will learn what you're like so that you can have a greater and greater friend. And some people use these and end up feeling like that's my real friend instead of like a person. Yes? It is creepy, right? So the speaker's argument was that this is actually increasing loneliness, not helping us with loneliness. And she went to the Google Ngram viewer. I don't know if you ever played with this, but so she typed in loneliness. And you could see from when the word loneliness was invented how it's been kind of increasing, etc. So she was arguing that these automated devices, and the more we use things like Facebook and social media, we're actually becoming more lonely. So it's bad news for us to get involved with the media, the AI, artificial intelligence, as companions. Instead, we have to get back to being friends with like other human beings and stuff. That was her argument. But notice, this is the percentage of it's being used in all of the books available from that year. So if you look at this, none of these are even at the point where it's 1 percentage point. So that doesn't. So this is an illusion of graphics to make it look like it's seriously increasing when actually it's hardly any difference at all. Plus, the first thing I said, which was bad, very bad. One of my friends even yelled at me. "You'll never learn," she said. She's great, by the way. But at any point, in any case, I said, that looks like the same curve as feminism. Might feminism be an explanation for why there's an increase in loneliness? That's politically incorrect. It was, of course, meant as a joke, but in a way serious. But by the way, I checked, and you can type in. Did I spell loneliness correctly?
I feel like lonely would show up more than loneliness.
There we go. Okay. It's still growing, right? But you can also type in feminisms. And see, they're not. It's not a coincidental curve. There's no concurrent relationship really between the two. So I looked that up. So my joke was totally wrong. But I was also convinced that years ago, in this book, The Great Disruption. This was before we started using all of this AI stuff, and he was pointing out, along with, if you're familiar with Robert Putnam and his book Bowling Alone, that our society was already losing all of its groups, its participant groups, like the bowling alone. In other words, you're not a member of your local bowling team, for your union or for your school or whatever, right? So people are now bowling alone. We don't have groups that we participate in. They're not joining all sorts of social clubs like the Elks and the various clubs that we have, the Masons, all that stuff. People are, so you go into those clubs and it's all old people, actually, because young people aren't joining and everything. So we've already entered into this kind of period where our social networking is just disintegrating. Right? At the time, Fukuyama argued that, but guess what? We're going to be better off eventually because we have all of this new internet relationships that we could start building, where you'll be able to find friends out there that like the very specific things you like. So you can have like friends that both like playing the same computer games, and you'll have friends that'll be all over the world, but you'll still be able to chat with people that like the things you like and maybe play games simultaneously with one another all over. So that will create a new way for us to build friendships. Of course, the problem with those, Fukuyama points out, is that when you've got a friend in Texas, Florida, Arizona, wherever, all these, friends that you like and you engage with, maybe even daily, but when you break your knee and you need someone to bring over pizza, none of them can do it because, of course, none of them are local, right? So the advantage still to the old kinds of societies we participated in was much better for us than the new ones. We haven't quite figured this out yet. Although, actually, I bet somebody in Arizona could make you feel better by ordering pizza for you from, I bet you could, it would still work pretty well. I bet you. Yes.
But in a sense, if the AI is advanced far enough, they can go get you pizza.
Oh, if you get like the robot.
Yeah, like the one in Jack.
Yeah, she could. Well, you could have her in the house. She could just go to the door and bring the pizza in, set it down at the table for you. Can't have any herself, even if she wants to experience flavor. Not going to happen. We haven't developed that yet, right? But that's. And by the way, and I'm not going to say this, but you can imagine some of these dolls actually become more intimate than just getting you pizza.
It said sex
I
dolls
won't
in the
say.
video.
Pardon?
It said sex dolls in the video. So.
Well, I don't want to, just let you use your imagination on that, or not, By the way, there are male dolls too. That's, well, there are. I'm sorry, it's just true. So you can. He made a robot to look just like himself. Isn't that pretty neat? Can you tell which one is the? That's pretty weird. So that's pretty cool. Uh-oh, we don't want to. No, we don't want to. I don't know. Let's get rid of that. Okay. So
what's consequentialism?
good question. Consequentialism means that what's important in our decisions is the consequences. So this will contrast with Kant's ethics. Kant feels that you should never use a person as a means to an end. You should always respect that person and not treat them as a tool. Right? For utilitarianism, however, there's no problem treating someone as a tool to an end, because the end, the consequences, is what's important. So doctors, for example, have used utilitarianism as their ethic in experiments, where, for example, they maybe have 100 individuals that have syphilis, and they lie to those patients, telling them that they're treating them for their disease, but in fact they're not. They give them a fake pill, right, whatever, right? And what they want to do is just study the progress of the disease, because by doing that they'll learn a lot of information which will then enable them to help treat the disease for millions of people better. So they're screwing those 100 patients for the benefit of millions of people.
But they're able to come up with a cure for that while the experiment was going on, and they still didn't give it to him. So I don't really see how that helped the cause, and that's one of the reasons why we have a board of ethics now for.
Excellent, excellent. So utilitarianism has caused these kinds of problems as an ethic, and we've of course tried to improve our way of dealing with that as an ethical system, but we still use it because we're still, I think, especially the British and the United States, we've been very influenced by the utilitarian point of view because of our close association with the British, right? And so utilitarianism is a very important part of our ethic. In fact, we usually refer to our ethic as pragmatism. But guess what? Pragmatism and utilitarianism is probably just about the same thing. Just different words for the same thing. But so that's the issue with consequentialism. We're concerned about the end result, whereas for Kant, you're not allowed to think about the end result. You have to do your duty regardless of what might actually happen. Remember when we were talking about the woman in the car? You know, do you get out of your car to try to help her, even if 3 big guys are going to beat the crap out of you too, right? You know, well, you know, for Kant, you have to do your duty, get out and do your best. You know, who knows what might actually happen? Of course, you know, they do beat you up, and then 2 people are dead instead of just 1, right? Whereas a more pragmatic point of view would be, hey, I'm not getting involved. I'll call the police, but I'm not going to get out there because they'll just kill me too, right?
Isn't that like what Aristotle says? And he's like, what makes you like what? It's a way whether or not you're gonna get more hurt if you try to intervene.
You know, I would think Aristotle is much more pragmatic than Kant. Kant was a pietist, so in a sense, his ethic was based more on a kind of religious basis than science, in a sense. We only have, what, 5 minutes?
Yeah.
I already gave you your quiz question, fill in the blank, and you already have the answer. But so this is an interesting problem. No one has a moral right to our generosity or beneficence. So we could put that in terms of the Hondurans that are coming north. They feel it's a universal right to migrate. If you are living in a country that's full of violence and there are no jobs, etc., then you can migrate to some place where the jobs might be. On the other hand, you can be trying to migrate to a place that has lots of bumper stickers like this. You do. And if 5,000 more people come into the United States with no job and expect food and clothing and a place to stay, somebody has to afford all that for them, which means that somebody is going to be obligated to giving up from their generosity, their beneficence, in order to take care of them. So you can see that that's an immediate conflict between the people that expect the benefits and, of course, those that don't. What they'll discover is a lot of shotguns. I predict if that 5,000 plus people continue to march towards the border, once they get there, they're going to meet quite an interesting array of armed resistance. Does that sound like a good bet?
Yeah. I heard Trump might like get like a bunch of tanks and stuff and like position them on the border and like militarize like the area. Yeah.
Jesus. Did you call me again? But you realize the source of that joke. That's, can I use Bill Cosby still, or is that? No.
And because of my father, between the ages 7 through 15, I thought my name was Jesus Christ. The Jesus Christ. And my brother Russell thought his name was Damn It. Damn it, will you stop all that noise? And Jesus Christ, sit down. So one day I'm out playing in the rain. My father said, damn it, will you get in here? I said, Dad, I'm Jesus Christ. And because of my father, between the ages 7 through 15.
Sorry about that. As a matter of fact, my dad didn't call me Jesus Christ. He called me by my full name, Jesus H. Christ. What does the H stand for? Anybody know? Have you heard that before?
Yeah.
So if I've asked students, what's Jesus's middle initial? Everyone says H. Just throw this out there, just as a fun question, and in addition to the other one, which you probably already know the answer to. Where did the H come from in Jesus's middle initial? And it's really not, right? Okay. Where did the H come from?
Is that extra credit?
Yes.
Yes. I like extra credit.
Extra credit. Any questions for me? Are you guys was this fun?
Yeah.
If you're not having fun, you could let me know. That doesn't mean I'll bring pizza though.
What about the Oreos?
Yeah, come on.
Warriors?
The
Oh, the
Oreos.
Oreos?
Yes.
Oreos? Well, I'm afraid that some of you might be allergic to Oreos.
It's a risk we're gonna have to take.
Yeah, well, there might be peanuts in them.
You have a weird set of Oreos.
Mr. Jamison,
Yes.
I just wanted to check and make sure you got my exam, this last exam, before I turn in.
Did you get a reply?
I didn't, but my UAA email has